Well, welcome everybody. It is November's episode 2024 of What's Up, Know, Learn, Fly. So welcome as always. Glad you're here with us. This month's topic is Night Piloter, your kit for safer night flying. I hope you hopefully get the joke. We were kind of playing on Knight Rider, the old TV show from the 80s. And somebody did ask early on, like, what is KITT for? And the KITT is, of course, from the TV show. It is Knight Industries 2000 is what it stands for. I was just trying to cram something in to get KITT in there to make the title fun. So
we have dated ourselves there, haven't we?
Heck yes, we have, but it's okay. If you haven't seen it, go check it out on YouTube or someplace. All right. Just a little bit of housekeeping as always, attendee a control panel. So we want to talk about if you were viewing on a PC or on a tablet. The first part is if you're on a PC, check out the attendee control panel. It'll look something like this part on the right. You'll see a little question bubble, like a cartoon type of guy. You can type your question, you click on that, type the question in down here where it says ask the staff a question, and click the send button. If you don't click send, we won't see it, so make sure you do that. And then on the attendee control panel, if you're on a tablet, iPad or Android of some sort like that, you should look something like this. Look for that little question mark symbol right there. Type in your question in the pop-up box and make sure you hit that send button. As always, my name is Chris Moser. I am the Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA. I was a school teacher for a long time, and also I am a CFI of several ratings there. I work here with flight schools and CFIs, and joining me, glad to have him as always, is Dan Justman.
Thank you, Chris. Very happy to be here. Again, I have the privilege and pleasure to lead the You Can Fly Foundation, AOPA Foundation You Can Fly initiatives, high schools, flight training, flying clubs, Rusty Pilots, and the amazing teams that bring it to life each and every day. So thrilled to be here and would love to introduce our good friend behind the scenes, Stephen Schroeder. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen.
Look at this picture.
Yes, you got it. Got it. So, coordinator of the Flight Training Initiative, I work directly with Chris and Dan on a variety of different projects to do my best to help keep everything afloat. Had a variety of careers before this, but kind of fell into this amazing place. So always happy to be here.
All right, cool. And just a little note too, Stephen and I both work on the Flight Training Experience Awards, which we just wrapped up, and that'll be coming out in the near future. Next couple of months, we'll be announcing who our best instructors and best flight schools are for 2025.
Lots of data.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, so Chris and Stephen and I get to be here each and every month with all of you and appreciate the opportunity, but we are able to do it because of generous donations from foundations and individuals to the AOPA Foundation. So if you like what you see for this and other programs supported by the foundation, please do donate. All are greatly appreciated. AOPAfoundation.org to make contributions. That's okay. No, it was a perfect segue. You nailed it. It was perfect. So
hey Dan, by any chance, does this show have wings credit?
You know, it's amazing, Chris. Yes, it does. If you are watching live and you have registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address, you will get credit in a couple days. You won't need to do anything else. We'll take it from there and take care of it. If you're not sure if you have registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address, please send an email to ftinitiative@aopa.org. FT, Flight Training Initiative at aopa.org. We'll be able to verify and get you that credit through the FAA. And yes, if you've heard something that you'd like, something that you weren't sure of, want to go back and check it later, you are able to watch a recorded version one of two places. On YouTube, the AOPA Pilot video channel, and the playlist is What's Up, and also webinars at aopa.org. On our website, we've got an archive there under Don't Get Rusty. You can find today's episode and all the others preceding this on those two channels. So, Stephen,
there it goes.
What happened today, many years ago?
I didn't have something really great for today, but tomorrow in 1909, the Wright Company was incorporated into a business with a capital stock of $1 million. First company by the Wright brothers that was made specifically to manufacture airplanes. And I thought it was interesting that just 79 years later, on the same date in 1988, the B-2 bomber was rolled out for the first time to be seen by the public. So quite a change from the Wright flyer to the flying wing.
That's pretty cool. All right. Not that bad. Hey, what's on approach today? So today we're going to be talking about obviously night flying. Unfortunately, we didn't do anything with Transams with red things on them for those who know what I'm talking about. But we're going to talk about kind of just an overview of night flying. There are some great resources in the handouts. So pretty much everything that I'm going to talk about today is in the articles that I share with you, plus more. There's a lot of other stuff that I put on the handout as well. Now, please do know that just because of our GoToWebinar software sometimes can be a little quirky, there are two links right now for the handouts. They are both the same handout, but one of them is an original one that we deleted. And for me, it's still showing. So if you click on one, you get an error, click on the other one, you should get it. They are both supposed to be the same handout, so you're not missing anything. But for me, at least, and I don't know about your experience, but for me, that bottom one is the one that works. But you'll find out when you try it. But check out the handout. Lots of great articles from AOPA. Even have one from ForeFlight on there too. So, all right, Dan, we got to get into this one because we got a lot of stuff to cover. You see, there's a lot. We're going to go all the way from flight planning to talking about some night weather considerations to how to pre-flight and get yourself going on your flight, to flying, departure, en route, arrival, etc., all the way down. And we're going to end up with some of the Air Safety Institute's proficiency tips that came from a safety study that they did. And that study, of course, is on the handout. So let's do it. First of all, I know, Dan, you and I have both done some flying at night. I've done some as an instructor, of course, but I did a whole bunch when I was flying freight. I know that you've done some as well because you've done some long cross countries. Yeah. What is it that for you? Do you like flying at night? What's the deal with you?
I love it's so peaceful. It's so beautiful. There's not as much traffic, and it's amazing. You feel like you're in a real life video game. It's just so cool to see. I like being able to pick out airports a little bit further ahead using the lights. That's always a little bit of a cheat code there. It's just typically more smooth, and it's beautiful. It's peaceful, beautiful, and it's just a great experience. And I love sharing that with others too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree too. It's a very cool experience, the stuff you get to see. Of course, there are some cons that come with it. And that's the part that a lot of folks worry about, which is, well, what if I have an emergency? What if I lose my engine? Where am I going to land? So we're going to talk about some of that stuff today and some of the ways that you can kind of mitigate some of those risks, hopefully. But overall, it is a pretty cool thing to do. So let's get to it. So the first part, flight planning. And as this was one that used to weigh on my mind flying freight because I flew out in Arizona. And so typically, usually in the morning, I wasn't flying at night or in the dark, but coming home, especially on Friday nights, our run was later, and I was out flying in the mountains. And in one case, there was one run that I was in a single engine airplane where I had to dodge some mountains and stuff. So knowing terrain, knowing where the terrain was and how to avoid it, and we had procedures that we followed, but it was still nerve-wracking. So we want to make sure that we're aware of that terrain. So we're going to talk about that. But the big thing is the landmarks that you can use, Dan. I know for you, I mean, what are probably some of the biggest landmarks that you see sticking out when flying at night that you recall?
Towers for sure. That's a big one. And then cities. It's really neat to see, like when you're getting close, you're like, okay, we're getting to a populated area. I can see it. You know, it's a big flood of lights to see there. So definitely big landmark there. But a lot of the other stuff you certainly lose. That's the big one.
Yeah.
You know, roads,
like
as
lakes,
you mentioned on the slide,
rivers,
exactly.
All that stuff we might normally see, it's all black.
Unless you've got a great moonlit night, and then the reflection is amazing.
Yes, and that's why we're going to recommend that later on. But the things that you will be able to see, of course, and you probably already know this, so for a lot of folks, probably a review here, but cities, lighted towers, as Dan mentioned, major highways you normally can see too, although they can cause some illusions, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, and of course, airports. The thing that I learned flying freight was use those navigation aids. We had VORs, of course, that I would figure out routes that would keep me well clear of terrain, or I knew what altitude I needed to be on a particular radial. And back then, early GPS as well. Of course, now GPS makes that easier, but really plan ahead. Use those nav aids. Things like your maximum elevation figure, the MEF, and I show that in the picture here with the big red arrow sticking towards it. And that's telling you that if you fly at 3,200 feet, you will be like a couple of hundred feet at least above the highest obstacle in that area. So that'll keep you safe. And of course, usually fly higher than that. When flying at night, you might recall this, Dan, I don't know how much of an issue. It depends on the folks still using paper versus an electronic flight bag or an EFB. But you want to make sure that if you are drawing it, make sure it is clear and big and that's readily visible, especially when you need to use a colored flashlight, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But yeah, dark ink, large print, make sure you test these things before you go flying too, to make sure you can see it if you're using paper. If you're using an electronic flight bag, there's other things you'd want to be aware of, which I know you mentioned, Dan, which is making sure you know how to adjust the light source, right?
Yeah, you flip on your iPad and it blasts you in pure daylight brightness, and that could do some damage. Just kind of temporarily not having you be able to see very well inside and outside the cockpit.
Yes.
So definitely want to make sure you've got those preset and you know how to adjust them quickly, so you don't wreck your eyesight at that point.
Exactly. So then learn, make sure you know how to dim your tablet, whatever type you're using, and then check the manufacturer, whether it's Garmin or ForeFlight or one of the other producers or whatever. Make sure you know how to control the dimming and set them for night. And another good tip here is make sure you study that route and preparation. I can remember flying. It was called the River Run. It was the one I remember doing out in Arizona. I went up along the Colorado River up towards Laughlin, Nevada. And just knowing that terrain, and I would study and I would review over and over again. Even while I was flying, I had notes made too, so that I knew like where the mountains were and how to stay clear of them. And so I knew how to stay in that valley, because a lot of times you couldn't see those mountains at night. So study it. And then we'll mention this again too, the fuel reserve. While 91-151 reg only requires you to have 45 minutes of extra fuel beyond your destination or your point of intended point of landing, it's probably wise to at least double that, at least an hour, if not really what ASI says, the Air Safety Institute, probably an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours of extra fuel, just to make sure that you're good to go, because you do not want to be running out of fuel at night. All right. The biggest issue with the weather is that you can't see it at night, especially if you get like an overcast layer, even if it's up high, like maybe there's plenty of clearance down below, but now it's going to block out things and you won't know if you fly into it because the moon's likely going to be blocked out if there is a moon. And then you could end up flying into it and not even realize that it's happening. So really got to be careful. And of course, we all know they might forecast clouds to be at 6,000 feet. But how many times have we had it happen when you go up and you go flying and it's lower than they had forecast it to be? So you got to be really careful. And so some of the considerations are if you're flying VFR at night, you might want to consider only going when it's clear. You can see that moon, you can see those stars to help you out. So just one thing. Have you ever had any experiences like that, Dan, at all? With
and it didn't happen, but I just got spooked once. It was cooler temperatures. There wasn't supposed to be icing, but it just really made me think about that. Like, wow, I'm never going to see that unless I keep an eye on it. So I just kept kind of popping the flashlight out there onto the strut of the 182 just to see if there's anything building up that I'm not aware of, because it's just tough to see. The windscreen was dry, but you just never know that moisture level. Is it going to stick to the aircraft if it starts to get a little bit colder? So.
And that's a factor, of course, too, is precipitation. Even if it's warm, maybe there's no, obviously you're getting up in altitude, it's getting cooler. It's possible that there could be ice, but even if there weren't ice, the precipitation can cause illusions as well, or can cause reduction in visibility. So in all these cases, it's in a lot of the articles that I gave to you guys too, it often mentions that around the world, other than the US mainly, but most countries around the world require you to have an instrument rating to fly at night because of the fact that that is the closest you're probably going to get to instrument flying, legally, is flying at night, flying in the dark. So really, the really key thing here is to be careful. And that's one of the things I'll mention is that, maybe get an instrument rating or make sure you train. We'll talk about that when we get into proficiency tips. All right. What about getting ready, doing that pre-flight for flying at night? So some of the things you want to consider here is, if possible, pre-flight in the daytime or pre-flight where there's light, and maybe do it well before your flight, because it takes your eyes at least 30 minutes to adapt to the dark. So do it sometime before that. You can always, again, do a kind of another pre-flight using your flashlight, but seeing things in the daylight or seeing things in good light are going to help you identify things that are hard to see even with a flashlight in the dark. Check to make sure all the lights are working, all the ones, especially, of course, the required lights, which we'll go over here shortly, but make sure they're all working, and make sure that alternator belt is good to go, because you obviously don't want to be losing electricity or electrical power on a night flight. That'll make things a lot more complicated than you probably want them to be. And I thought this was an interesting tip too, for fuel contamination. When you're checking your fuel and you're looking for sediment, it's awfully hard to see that at night. And so one tip you could do is to hold it against a white background. We know most airplanes are typically white, and then hold your flashlight from the side, and that can help you identify if there's anything in the fuel when checking that.
I do that same thing during the day. I always go up against the white airplane just to help see if there's any sediment in there.
There you go. Not a bad idea, and certainly makes it stand out, I imagine.
Yep.
With pilot, make sure we're checking the pilot too. I already mentioned the idea of vision. We've all probably remembered that from our training, that at least it takes 30 minutes for our eyes to adapt to the dark. Using a dim red light can help. It might make your night vision come on a little more effectively, a little bit quicker, maybe, but that full 30 minutes is what you're going to need because of the, it's called the visual purple in our eyes. The rhodopsin, I believe, is the word, if I'm saying it correctly. And anytime your eyes are exposed to that white light, of course, the process restarts. So here's something to think about is it's like we think about, oh, I'm not using my flashlight, I don't have that on. But consider the lights you'd even see during takeoff. Some of the runway lights as you get to the ends are white. So those things could happen too, just as you're lifting off, maybe climbing out. So just things to keep in mind that we need to be ready. Altitude, I know that Ken, I just saw that earlier mentioned this on one of the questions, altitude can reduce our vision as well. While we know the oxygen requirements for pilots are above 12,000 feet, 12,500 in the daytime. At nighttime, the FAA and the Air Safety Institute recommends using oxygen maybe above 5,000 feet because our eyes need a lot more oxygen to work in that reduced that low light environment or maybe no light environment. So that helps. So you're adding that oxygen can help you see better. Did you have something, Dan?
Yeah, Chris, we had a couple of notes on that. So you nailed it exactly. We had a note that, the rule of thumb is to use oxygen at or above 5,000 at night, and had suggested ½ liter per minute. So I'll leave that up to all the oxygen gurus as to how that really translates for them. But also monitor your pulse oximeter for 95% or higher. So a great use of that tool just to keep the check in there because you're not going to realize it. A follow-up to that was also to bring oxygen and use it at a much lower altitude because your eyes get really oxygen hungry working at night. So additional strain. And I think that's why that recommendation was made. So great rules of thumb shared from our listeners and that you had hit as well. Thank you.
Very cool. And I do see, Jason, I know you've got a comment there. I'll try to remember the one about for the lights, looking for lights. We'll talk about that when we get to emergency. So remind me of that one from Jason Blair. It's a good tip when we get to that slide. One of the key things to flying at night, and of course I dealt with this flying freight as it's like as I would fly into the evenings and things like that, your biological clock, especially I didn't ever fly the overnight runs, but I knew some of the guys that did. And your circadian rhythm, we know how it is. It's like, you've worked all day or whatever, or even if you haven't worked all day, we tend to get in that habit of around whatever normal time of night, it's 10, 11 o'clock, whatever it might be, we get tired and get sleepy. And so the same thing, you're there, the airplane's humming along, you got the engine humming nice and smooth, the air's nice and smooth. It's really an easy way to kind of get lulled into sleep. So make sure you try to engage your brain. You can do things like, if you have a passenger or passengers with you, make sure you're talking with them to keep that brain engaged. If you don't, talk to air traffic control, right? So, you can get that kind of get flight following type of thing going, talk to flight service, just make sure you're talking to somebody that can help engage your brain and keep you active because especially on longer cross countries, it's really easy to get lulled into that sort of things just chilling out and can make you sleepy. Cockpit organization. So how can you make sure that you're good to go there? Well, obviously having a flashlight or maybe two, with fresh batteries. Of course, the joke always is, what's a flashlight? It's just a container to hold dead batteries. So make sure you check those batteries and have some extra ones and all that stowed somewhere within reach that you can get to them as you need them. Charts and materials, make sure if you're using charts or other materials that they are organized and stowed. I had a whole system when I was flying where I had my knee board. I don't have a photo of this, but I had my knee board and I specifically picked out a knee board that had slots on both sides. And I had places where my pens always go here, my charts went here. Of course, now using an EFB, I have that set to go, but I always had places where I knew things were and I had extras. And then I had other places where I had my bag stowed in a certain place that I could reach it if I needed to. This is probably one of the most important ones. We fly most of the time, of course, during the day. And I don't know if you've had this experience, Dan, but have you flown at night and then trying to figure out where the light controls are? Like, how do I dim this? And how do I turn these red ones on? You end up turning it up super bright. So really be familiar with your cockpit layout. You got to know your controls. You got to know what your flight instruments look like. And if they have digital displays, how do I dim those? Because those can also be blinding. And then, of course, the lighting, the cockpit lighting or any other types of lighting. And then finally, before you start your engine, make sure you turn on the anti-collision beacon to let other people know around you that you're getting ready to turn that propeller, assuming that's what you're doing.
Makes sense.
Somebody mentions good carbon monoxide monitor alarms. Certainly always a good idea, day or night. Okay, how about ground ops? If we're leaving from our home airport, of course, we want to always be referring to our airport diagram, but if you're going someplace unfamiliar, even more important to have that and study the airport diagram ahead of time. Look for the runways that you're probably going to be using based on the forecast weather. I know for me, I don't know if you've ever been up to Lancaster, Dan, but for whatever reason, the way those runways kind of cross in this weird kind of X sort of thing, and then the taxiways are confusing based on the landing lights. So going to an unfamiliar airport can really be disorienting in terms of finding it. So knowing that well.
Yep, I've been there during the day. I have not flown into that airport at night.
Okay, yeah, so at nighttime, it's definitely one. And that's where I've actually asked for a progressive taxi. If you need help, don't forget, we've mentioned this before, but getting a progressive taxi, whether day or night, but certainly at night when things can be harder to see, that ATC is always willing to help you out. And then taxi and landing lights. So always some discussion about when to use these. Typically here are the tips that we want to give, the recommendations that we get here from AOPA. Number one, your taxi lights and landing lights, probably turn those off while you're waiting at a hold short line at the active runway. And the reason is because you don't want to be blinding someone trying to come in and land. You don't want to be giving them a blast of white light as they're trying to come in and do their landing and flare and everything else, where they need to hopefully have their full night vision to help them. Off when on a taxiway that parallels the runway, because again, you might be facing right into someone who's coming. So use good judgment on these. These are not set rules, but use good judgment in doing that. And then finally, hold your strobes until you're on the runway to prevent disorienting other pilots as well. So those flashing can, again, blind other pilots. And the biggest thing here is probably use good communication and look, but try to, again, avoid blinding other pilots, be a good neighbor as you're taxiing. Of course, if you're concerned that there's a collision that you're worried about, then talk. If need be, then turn on lights if that's going to stop that. But barring a situation like that, try to avoid blinding other pilots. All right, anything to add, Dan, before I move on?
No, good. Keep going.
Okay. All right. So now, how about getting ready to take off to make that, to depart the airport? Well, the big thing here is that there are illusions, and I only have 2 on here. There are more. There is an article in the handout that's got more of them, the typical night illusions. But the 2 that we've got here, one is the false horizon, and we'll talk about some other ones later. But illusions can cause disorientation, and on takeoff, you're going from a relatively well-lit environment. You've got runway lights, taxiway lights, etc. And all of a sudden you're pitching up, and depending on what is on the end of the runway as you're departing, especially if it is a more rural place and it is dark, it can be immediate disorientation. Because if there's not a lot of lighting on the ground after you're taking off, or if it's sparse lighting, it could look like stars too. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I've had this experience. I was one that it is burned in my memory of what that was like to be disoriented. I was with, and I think I've told the story on this show before, but I was out in Arizona. I was doing holds with a student of mine. We were doing some instrument training. And as we were turning away from Phoenix. We were down south of Phoenix and turning away. And as we turned away, the lights of Phoenix are now behind me. And in front of me was just this highway that had cars on it. And it was angled. You can imagine I'm kind of drawing this line across the screen. It was angled like that. And immediately I was disoriented. I could tell that I could not tell which way it was up. I had to go right over to the attitude indicator, and I had to study it because I was really disoriented. And it happens just instantly. And I had to trust the attitude indicator and kind of get things on, because I'm the one looking outside with my student who's under the hood doing the holds and everything. So
that created a false horizon, the angle of the road? Yeah.
It's exactly what that road was, looking like a false horizon. That's why I put that up there. So that is one, and we'll talk about some other ones a little bit, and there's more, like I said, in the handouts. All right. So what you should do is treat every night takeoff like it's an instrument takeoff. If you're not sure how to do that, get with a CFI and practice. But basically, you're going to be scanning your instruments to make sure that you're maintaining proper pitch attitude. You obviously have your power, looking at the airspeed and so on, and learn how to do that, because that way you can avoid that disorientation. Because you can imagine getting disoriented just a few hundred feet off the ground and how like bad of a situation that would be. So keep it a straight climb, practice with the CFI, of course, as appropriate, depending on the airport you're taking off. If your airport requires some crazy maneuvering, maybe it's not a good idea to be taking off there at night. In fact, some airports, when you look in the chart supplement, will even tell you, no operations at night, and it's usually because of reasons like something like along those lines, like terrain. So practice that with the CFI and just make sure you stay careful. All right, en route operations, I broke this down into two just because there's a lot of good stuff here. If you're reading charts, you might need a white light if you're looking at a paper chart just to be able to see it. So, of course, the old trick I'm sure everybody's heard is keep one eye closed as you're doing it. That way it saves the night vision in that one. You have not heard that one?
I hadn't heard that one, no, but I can't wait to try it.
Yep, so keep one closed. What I like to do too is I have, and in fact, I've got it behind me here if I can reach it. Let's see if I can grab it here. I should have had this at the ready. Oh, it's clipped to my bag. Look at that. I'm going to grab it really quick here, but you can get the ones where you've got filters on them. I'm just going to pull it off. Here it is. So like this one I've got, it's got filters on it. And so in this, it's got various colors that I can choose, blue and red and so on. But what I'll do too is I will cover my flashlight with my hand just to barely let out the light that I need to be able to see, because this thing on its own is super bright. And they've got flashlights too that are made where you can hook them onto your headset and so on. So some really cool ones out there. So just get something so you can see, but make sure you're doing something where it's not going to ruin your night vision. Anti-collision lights, of course, they make seeing other aircraft easier. Those flashing lights make it so we can identify them in the air much easier, but be wary of autokinesis. And of course, that's the illusion where if you stare at a light, your eye moving, it can start to move and you think it's moving. And so you could think that a stationary light that you're staring at is actually traffic. So make sure you keep your scan moving and be aware of that autokinesis. Using flight following, that'll help you find that traffic, of course, and keep your brain engaged as well, so that you're talking to someone. And then finally, you can do things like update your weather regularly so you know what is going on. And plus, it's keeping your brain engaged too while you're flying. All right, anything before I move on to the next one?
Black hole effect. Do you have that coming up later?
That is coming up. Good call, everybody. So yeah, that's a good one. That is going to come up when we get to landings.
Good, thank you.
All right. Some hazardous weather signs. So how do you know when, remember, we talked about the fact that you typically can't see weather, especially on the darker nights. And so what could be some signs that maybe, there's things happening that you weren't aware of? Well, if you are flying on a supposedly clear night and you look up and you're starting to lose sight of the stars, that's probably a sign that there are clouds above you. So that's one thing. So stars start to disappear, not a good sign. Ground lights, if they start to get hazy, you start to see halos around the lights and things like that. That is a sign of potentially fog or low clouds below you, or it could be precipitation too. So be aware of that. If you start to see sparkles illuminated by your strobes, so your strobes are going off and you see sparkles, that could be the beginnings of rain or even snow showers. And again, the concern there is reduced visibility. And then, of course, in the case of snow or rain, depending on the temp, you have to worry about ice. And then if you are in clouds, so maybe you're flying IFR, you're getting into that low visibility, remember that landing lights and strobes, that flashing from the strobes can cause vertigo in precipitation or in clouds. So if you need to, turn them off in that case and get yourself out of that situation. And then finally, the big thing is if you are not planning on these things, you're not on an airplane equipped to deal with these, you're not on an instrument flight, it is time to get to an airport. So it could be signs of worse weather, rain-induced fog could be coming up or icing. So just really be careful. So you start to see these things, it might be a good sign to get on the ground. And of course, try to be conservative with your weather briefing and your planning anyway. All right, anything before I move on to the next one?
Back to the screens. Doesn't the light on an EFB screen ruin night vision? Same with glass panel display. If so, how does one mitigate that effect? So I think we were talking about being able to dim. So we've got that to make as little impact as possible. But any other ideas to mitigate that issue?
Yeah, they have the Yeah, and again, I don't know the science behind on how accurate it is, but I know, for example, like, and I use an iPad, so I don't know the Android, but I imagine it's got something similar. I know they have kind of a night mode that you can use on them so that
Okay.
it reduces some of that blue light stuff. And especially in the EFB itself, there usually is a night mode that you can flip it over to black, so you're not getting blasted by white light coming off it, or as much white light. So hopefully that helps. So again, the biggest thing is, this is where it's good to go up and try these things, and then get a flight instructor, try the things on the ground first, test it, make sure you really know how it works, and then go try it with a CFI, and just that way you can test these things out and see what kind of effects they do
Good
have
idea.
on you.
Have you
Yeah,
heard about
invert the colors on the iPad. Yep.
Have you heard about a green lens for reading charts?
Yes, I have heard of that too. But of course, the problem when you start using the different colored lenses is that it can wash out some of the features on a paper chart. So again, experiment. I found that the reds seem to generally work, although you lose the red. That's why I've got multiple ones that I can use. And honestly, when I would look at charts, I remember using my light. That's why I told you like this, where I let a little tiny bit of white light peek out. Just try to dim it as much as possible. So I had a whole technique that I would use for that. And I had another one, like I said, I had a light on my headset that I could turn on and off, and I would angle it down where I needed it so I could see. And I had color filters on it as well. That's why studying ahead of time too is so important to be prepared, especially when going on across country. All right, let's get to arrivals. So, and here's the black hole approach. Somebody mentioned they're reading my mind and thinking ahead. It is easy to be fooled by lighted parking lots or roads. And in fact, I remember working with folks and students in the past. The big thing I would always tell them too is it's like when you look and you think you see the airport, it's probably not the airport. Most often, it's like a city or a parking lot. Because how to find the airports, look for the dark spots. If it's in a city like here in Frederick, you literally know, I know Frederick is here. I know the airport is to the east of it. Look for the dark spot, and then you kind of look for those dim lights, because the airport lights, as bright as they may seem, are usually a lot dimmer than the ones for the city. So look for those darker spots to help you find it, and then you can usually find the beacon in that dark spot. And that's with the runway lights on I'm even talking about. Darkness can affect your depth perception. So that what it does, of course, as it says here too, of course, is makes it hard to judge our distance and altitude. And I've even had this experience driving out in the desert at night. So the black hole approach. The big thing is when there are few lights or terrain features, the runway and the PAPI seem to float. It's almost like we're playing like the Navy pilots coming to an aircraft carrier at night. They talk about that usually being scarier than combat, where you've got this floating deck just in black. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. If it's not a lot of lights around the airport, it can seem to float. And so that makes it tend to seem like we're high. And so we tend to get lower than we probably should. And come in for that. So how to mitigate that, and we'll talk about more of these in a second, but how to mitigate that is follow, if there is a VASI or a PAPI within 4 nautical miles of that runway, make sure you're on or above that glide slope. So trust it, because that way you won't get too low and hit obstacles. And then if there are really bright lights, and this is the one I've had the experience in the car out in the desert. I can remember driving across New Mexico in the middle of the night and seeing a light. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something ahead. Like we're going to come across civilization. And it was like an hour later that we finally get to it. And it was because it was a casino that was out there. And it was just this little beacon, little area of light out in the dark, but you can see it from so far away. It makes it seem like you're closer to it than you are. And it also seems like you are lower than you are when you're flying. So closer and lower than you are. So you tend to want to fly high and you feel like you're closer than you actually are. So keep those in mind that these illusions can happen. Anything before I move on?
You're doing great.
Okay. All right. So what are some tips we can do to mitigate these? And I saw some folks already suggesting some of these in the comments, because you guys are always on it as usual.
Yep.
Fly, if you know how, if you're trained, fly an instrument approach. In fact, we did a webinar not that long ago. I think it was this year, if I'm not mistaken, but we did one about using IFR charts to help you fly at night. So if you know how to fly an instrument approach, that's a great way to do it, because that will ensure you've got guidance to the runway and you're going to not hit any obstacles. So please don't do that without training. Practice that. If you don't know how, go get some training. You don't even have to have an instrument rating necessarily to do that. You can learn how to use an instrument approach even for VFR purposes. If you have a GPS, obviously, really useful to help you, especially if you can set up a kind of a glide slope where you know your distance, and then you can set up a course to it. So you can kind of put it into like OBS mode or whatever and set up a thing so you can line up with the runway and use it to help you guide right to the runway. Or if in those cases, maybe there's a VOR DME type of thing at your airport. I don't know how common that's. I know that we're slowly getting those deactivated with the prevalence of GPS. But if you do that, there is a tip that's in one of the articles, which I thought was pretty good. You can set yourself up with a standard 3-degree glide slope, assuming you've got that lateral navigation, whether it's the GPS or the VOR. And then you'll know that if I'm 5 nautical miles out, I should be at least at 1500 AGL, 1500 AGL, not MSL. If I'm getting within 3 nautical miles, about 900 feet, within 1 mile, about 300 feet AGL, that will get you you're coming down and on that 3-degree glide slope, and it should keep you above any obstacles, hopefully, that are there, which there are some tips here coming up for that. But the big thing is that what you want to remember here is obviously if there's a VASI or a PAPI, which is probably what you should be picking to go to for flying at night, use that instead. But this is just a way that can help guide you and give you some help.
Yep, we had a note there that said, what if there is no VASI or PAPI? So I love that comment. Maybe we shouldn't fly there at night if you don't have to.
Exactly. If it's not there, they probably don't want to do that. Fly over the airport. Another option one of the articles suggested too that I thought was interesting is fly over the airport and just enter a standard pattern. Maybe fly it a little high. I know I just tend to do this anyway at night, because I know here at we've got these hills over here to the east of us at over by the end of 30, and I always tend to want to fly high because I can't see them, and it always freaks me out. So of course you have to adjust for that for your pattern, but maybe fly a slightly higher than normal pattern. If you don't know the terrain around that airport, maybe you shouldn't be flying there at night. It's like if you can't tell. So check your charts, study it, and if in doubt, wait till the daytime. If runway lights start to blink or flash while you're on your final approach, that could be a sign that there are obstacles between you and the VASI or the PAPI. So it could be you're getting low, and so maybe get up a little more altitude. And then finally, another tip, I think Alicia was the one that put this in her article, use the heading bug, because this can help you keep your pattern square, because we can get disoriented at night. So it can help you keep your pattern square, and then also make sure that when you turn final that you're lined up on the correct runway, because if the number doesn't match the runway, something might be up there. So
speaking of lights,
yeah,
don't be afraid to ask to turn them on or activate them if they're pilot controlled. That could be an oversight if that's not part of a normal checklist for you. You got to make sure that you get those lights on to help you out.
Absolutely. And I think that's coming up here with the clicking part.
Gotcha.
We'll see. Because I remember going over that, and that wasn't in my notes, so it should be in here.
Sorry,
right.
Chris.
No worries. So, and in fact, you know what? I'm trying to think though, where did I have that? Well, we'll see in a second. If not, we will talk about that. Remind me. So for landing, so of course, one of the issues that we can have is when we're coming into flare, when do we flare? Because it's dark. So some tips here are start when the touchdown zone, like you can kind of see in the picture, when you start to be able to see the touchdown zone markings and the tire marks in your landing beam light, that can be a good clue to maybe start my flare and my round out and my flare. The big thing is if you do use that technique, do not fixate on that, because then you'll be looking way too close. Of course, transition, as always, transition your eyes down the runway. And in fact, one tip you can use is as the runway lights are starting to come up and they start to seem like they're getting to my level or just above, that's another place maybe to finish your flare. Practice this with a CFI. This tip with the runway lights too can be useful if you don't have a landing light. Maybe it wasn't working when you took off, or for whatever reason, that's a way that you can help judge that. And then especially if you're going to a more rural area, although I've seen this out in Phoenix too, animal eyes are on rural runways during takeoff and landing, so look for that flashing of their eyes and be ready to abort. Have that abort plan ready and make sure you're acting quickly on it, or of course a go around in the case of a landing. All right, so let's talk about some of the night emergencies. I am trying to remember. I'm thinking it's coming up, but remind me about that light thing. I had some comments on the light thing, and I'm like questioning myself. So for the engine failure, the one thing that's always freaked me out too, and I used to hate this, like out in Arizona, at least I knew most of it was flat, but of course you'd look and there's cactus everywhere over the desert. But engine failures are no more likely at night than they are in the daytime. So it's not like it's like all of a sudden, and even though it seems like whenever we fly over water or fly at night that the engine seems to run rougher than it does during the day. But there's no more. And in fact, what the Air Safety Institute's study, which is linked in the handout, what the study shows is that fuel mismanagement is the most likely cause. So if you can be good at using your fuel system and doing all that and being super conservative and knowing how to use your fuel system, you will likely avoid the biggest cause of these engine failure happening. Here's coming back to Jason, what he was talking about, so that one earlier on. Plan flights over areas with more airports and off-airport landing sites. And in fact, actually, I was thinking of Jason's for the electrical failure one coming up here shortly. But also be thinking that Jason Blair had a great tip there, which is know where the airports are, or maybe even plan your route along where there are airports that always have their lights on in case you do lose your electrical system and you can't click to turn them on. That would be a great time to be able to know, I know this airport has lights on all the time. I can go there and land without having to worry about being able to turn my lights on. Fly higher for more glide range, so you've got more time to deal with it. And then finally, make sure you scan those engine instruments. We can get really complacent and not worry about them, but that way you can identify any trouble happening early and can maybe go and mitigate that and get down before an actual failure were to happen. Because usually the engine's going to give you signs of something going wrong. Oil temp, oil loss, engine running rough or reduced RPM. These things it's going to probably tell you. It's usually not just going to be all of a sudden it's just going to stop. Okay. What about if you go VFR into IMC? Of course, this is probably one of the most deadly things that we can do, whether day or night, but at night even worse. It is much more common and deadly than an engine failure, according to the Air Safety Institute. And so the biggest thing here is prevention is the best cure. So get those briefings, be conservative, be careful, but also be prepared for the worst. So practice your hood work, go up with the CFI, use the simulator, and make sure that you are still current, whether you're IF instrument rated or not. Practice that hood work for those emergency escapes from instrument conditions. And then even better, go get an instrument rating and stay proficient on it. So make sure you practice. In fact, I even had a plan for that later today. Maybe I'll go and get some practice in to keep myself current on that stuff. So keep your proficiency up. Now here's the electrical failure one that I mentioned too, and this is another one. Jason's tip fits really well right here, with the idea being that we want to make sure we know where there are airports that have lights on all the time, but be prepared. So have flashlights. Bring your flashlight. Bring multiple sets of batteries and know where they are and they're readily available to you. How about a handheld transceiver? So that way, if you do lose your electrical system, you still have the ability to communicate and click the lights on and off. Practice with a CFI at night doing electrical emergencies so you can practice what it would be like and have a plan. Monitor, just like you monitor the engine instruments, monitor your am meter, load meter, or if you have both in both of them, and practice your plan that if you do have an electrical failure, how are you going to reduce that battery load? Now, I've had a couple of electrical failures happen, and they tend to just happen. The first time it happened, I was complacent. I was working with a student, and I was not paying attention. And so there were signs happening. I was too busy doing my talking or whatever, and all of a sudden the power just all went out. On the other two times that I've had it happen, though, it was because of that first experience that embedded in my mind of like, oh my gosh, I want to be careful. You are going to get those warning lights. If you're monitoring the ammeter, you're going to see that it's down. You still are going to have battery power at that point for at least a short amount of time. And in both my other experiences where I've had that happen, we were able to get back to the airport no problem and still had power for flaps and everything else. Just keep that in mind. All right, anything, Dan, before I go on to the next one?
A lot of notes just about cross-country flying, a little bit step back, but a lot of people, especially when there aren't a lot of airports or a lot of lights, following roads is a great way for them to kind of keep tabs on where they're at and to make sure that they've got some good situational awareness.
Exactly, too. So the roads can help, and then potentially maybe places to land depending on what it is. Of course, you have to worry about wires and all the stuff we would worry about in the daytime. But I used to do the same thing. It gave me at least some comfort knowing that there were people down there and that I might have a place to land, that I'm not going to just run into the side of a mountain or something like that. So, all right, so let's hit up some regulations. I think we got 2 slides, just a quick review of your regs. Nothing, shouldn't be anything earth shattering here, but just some review for you. Remember, for passenger carrying purposes, I didn't put the 90 days on here, so I was remiss in that. But this is that 90-day one, 6157. You need to do 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop in the same category and class of aircraft that you want to fly in the preceding 90 days. So that got cut off somewhere out of my notes, but in the preceding 90 days. So you need to do that. And so remember that category in class. So if you're up flying, maybe you fly an Aztec or a Seminole a whole bunch, and you fly it at night, that does not cover you flying a 172 at night, because that's a different category. Actually, sorry, it's a different class of aircraft. So category being things like airplane, glider, helicopter, rotorcraft, that sort of thing. And then the class being with an airplane, single engine versus multi-engine, that sort of thing. So keep that in mind when doing that. So same category and class and 90 days. Required equipment, 91205. It's everything that you would do in the daytime. There's that acronym that I'm sure a lot of you have heard, tomato flames, or depending on how you spell flames. So it's all of that stuff, plus the one I use is flaps to remember this. So the F stands for fuses. So you're going to need one spare set if your aircraft uses fuses, because some of them just use circuit breakers. Right. But one spare set of fuses, or 3 of each kind, like of the different amperage. L for the landing light. If it's operated for hire, it needs to have that operating landing light, although I really would not want to go flying with an inoperative landing light at night, regardless of if I'm for hire or not. A for anti-collision and strobe lights. Make sure those are all working, because it helps other aircraft see us. P for the position lights, of course, that's the red, the green, and then the white light on the back. And then S for your source of electrical energy to operate that required equipment. That's like your alternator. So make sure you've got all that stuff. And the other set of regs here is the fuel that I mentioned earlier. 91-151 says that when flying at night, you got to have enough fuel to reach your first point of intended landing, and 45 minutes more at cruise speed. Although I would recommend, I know the Air Safety Institute recommends, carry more than that. I carry at least an hour no matter what. And at night, you might even want to be carrying an hour and a half or more with you, just to make sure you got plenty, just in case you need it. 91-157, if you need to use special VFR, like something happens unexpectedly, remember that special VFR at night requires you to have an instrument rating. Requires you to have an instrument equipped airplane. So you can't do it then either. And then at least 1 statute mile visibility, and you've got to be able to stay clear of clouds and have a clearance from ATC for that. So remember, special VFR is a pretty limited option at night. So really be conservative with that flight planning. And then the last one here, 91-209, you do need to use your position and anti-collision lights between sunset and sunrise. Definitions coming shortly. You are allowed to turn those off for safety. Say, for example, you get into precipitation, you're feeling like it's disorienting or something like that. Okay, anything before I go on to I think it's the last slide coming up.
Okay. Oh, we'll cycle back through the questions. We've got some fun stuff to go over.
Okay. Yep. All right. So actually, second to last slide, I believe. So definitions. So this was one, there's a whole article in the handout on this one, because I know that this is a common question we would get here at AOPA. So we have these, why we have to have 3 different ones, I don't know. But of course, we have the one where sunset to sunrise, which is what the article one mentioned. In fact, it's these graphics work their way across here. So the sunset to sunrise is that graphic on the left. And so that's what we generally think of about is when we think of nighttime, is the sun goes down. At this point, you're required to turn on position lights and anti-collision lights. So lights got to come on if you haven't already had them on. In the evening, you have the civil twilight to morning civil twilight. That is your FAA standard definition of nighttime. So when you're talking about logging aeronautical experience towards a certificate, that's the one you want to use. That's civil twilight, which is usually sometime after sunset. And I'll show you where to find that shortly. And then you have the other one for the night carrying. That is 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. So it's the darkest. It's the one on the far right there. So what I always say is, it's like when you're talking about that night currency type of thing, it's got to be dark. It can't be where it's like this twilight, you got a little bit of light. It's got to be dark. When it's dark, then you know, okay, that this is the time to do it. But of course, these are all listed. Well, let me show you. In places like, I have ForeFlight as an example here. There's also a website, the U.S. Naval Observatory. There's a link to that for you to find it. And so let's check that out really quick. So one thing, this is relatively new. There's a blog post I included as a link for ForeFlight, and I imagine that Garmin Pilot and the other ones probably have something similar. But if you can see right here, it shows me under the airport information. I clicked on airports, pulled up Frederick in this case. It shows me sunrise is at 7 a.m. and at 1650 or 450 Eastern Standard is sunset. But when I click on this little guy right here, it brings up even more information. So here's your morning civil twilight and so on. And of course, for that hour after sunset, hour after sunrise, you just got to do a little bit of math. So for sunset, it would be 1550. So you can see that civil twilight starts at 1519, but not until 1550 do you get that full version of FAA night. So hopefully that's helpful that that's in there. If you don't have an EFB that you're using like that, go to that Naval Observatory, or there are other sources as well. You can just search for it on the web to find out when the official times will be. But like I said, for night, it's when it's dark. When it gets black, you know that's nighttime. Okay, let's click to the next one. Here's the last one before we go to our questions and start to wrap things up for the official part of this. I thought these are some great proficiency tips. These were found in that Air Safety Institute study that I included on the handout. And so they did a really good job, I thought, of kind of looking at some accidents. They had studied, I think, from 2017 all the way up to 2021, examined the accidents that happened and gave some recommendations on what you can do to help avoid being in an accident. So here they are. First one, get night-specific training that goes beyond just currency, not just those 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop, but get night-specific training. And they mentioned some more detail here. Attend training that's focused on spatial disorientation so you can recognize it, prevent it, and recover from it. So what can you do to avoid those, to know they're happening, and what do you do to come out of that? And of course, with spatial disorientation, the biggest thing is being able to read your instruments and recover from that. Improve your stick and rudder skills, because what happened was people would get disoriented and then they would get into stalls and then lose control. So if you have that emphasis on stall awareness, you know it's coming and how to prevent it, that will help you to maintain control of the aircraft if you were to get disoriented. Install synthetic vision if you can have that. Heads-up displays, angle of attack indicators, all these things can help you, again, avoid loss of control. If you can, install engine monitoring devices to help you alert to issues like low oil or whatever it might be. So if you can get things that will help you keep an eye on your engine, that'll help prevent those issues of getting surprised by an engine failure. Review and refresh your knowledge of aircraft-specific fuel systems. In other words, know your fuel system, know your airplane. Really important to make you fly and help you fly safer. And then install better fuel monitoring devices. Fly with flashlights, headlamps. I know somebody else mentioned it too. I said I've got one that hooks onto my headset, which I love. I think it's made by, I want to say Pelican. It's been I've had it forever, but it's a really good one. I love the thing. And so that'll help illuminate those dark cockpits to help you see. Even if I lost electricity, I've got these things where I can still see. And then finally, assess arrival and departure information, the airport environment. Make sure you know what the light levels are going to be. Know your approach and departure paths for potential areas of spatial disorientation. So the biggest thing is just knowing ahead of time and being able to plan and be prepared. Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll do the official end for those here for Wings credit, and then we're going to take the questions. And I saw lots of good ones in there, so I'm glad to chat and see what else we can come up with.
Yeah, lots of good ones for sure. So AOPA Foundation, what Chris and I get to work for, philanthropic arm of AOPA, and we'd encourage you all to also become an AOPA member, become the part of the world's largest aviation community. Do your part to help support the advocacy that keeps general aviation free for us to enjoy here in the United States. Great sources and of resources available for any stage of your aviation journey, as well as the magazine, of course, and lots of discounts available from industry partners that want to help support you and your love of general aviation. Please do visit us, aopa.org/membership.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Our next episode coming up is December 19th, 2024. So just before Christmas. It's Pick Our Brains, because we say PIC pick here at AOPA just for the department. So it's our Pilot Information Center. It's frequently asked questions from AOPA's Pilot Information Center. We thought it'd be kind of a fun way to wrap up the year and look at what members have been asking AOPA, what questions that they've had. And so we're going to go over those, and we're going to have a guest from our Pilot Information Center here for you. So if you're not familiar with the Pilot Information Center, check on to learn about that, but also find out all these questions that people, these frequently asked things that they hear about all the time, and we'll give you the answers, obviously, too. We won't just give the questions. We'll of course, go over the answers. So I think that'll be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. Stephen, I know real quick, just a note on Wings credit. If anybody's got any trouble, we mentioned it earlier, as long as you registered using the email from your AOPA, or sorry, not your AOPA, your FAAsafety.gov account, you're good to go. You'll automatically get it. Just give us a little bit of time, because Stephen, I know, collects it, that information, and checks it out. But I believe, Stephen, you've got a link potentially you can throw in the chat too, in case anybody's wondering that they can submit that.
Yes, I set up a Microsoft form where you can submit information. I will get that into the general chat here in just a moment.
Okay, so we'll put that up so you can get to that. And then, of course, if you have any ideas for topics that you would like to see, I'm excited because I know next year, early next year, we have a special guest coming on for aerobatic flight, which has been a long wanted one that we've had requests for. But let us know if you've got any other requests, because we would love to see if we can put a show together for you. Just contact us at FT, that's Foxtrot Tango Initiative at AOPA.org, FT Initiative at AOPA.org. You can let us know if you've got any ideas to do that. So that is for that. Let's hit the questions. I'll leave this up for a bit here.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so I'm not a CFI. I am night current in a Cessna 172. My buddy wants to become night current in my plane. Can I be in the plane with him?
Let's see. So your buddy wants to become night current. So I'm assuming this other person. So did the person say they were night current?
They are night current.
Okay. So you're not a CFI. This is an interesting one. This is a good one for the Pilot Information Center. I'm just trying to think of any potential issues on this one. Because to be pilot in command of the aircraft, I want to double check. I would recommend double checking this with the Pilot Information Center, but let me just give you my measured opinion here on this one, what I think it would be. If you are the one, you are night current and you are acting as pilot in command, you can take a passenger with you. And as long as you remain the pilot in command, I think it might be okay, but I want to double check that. I don't want to give you an absolute answer because I am not 100% sure on that one.
Gotcha.
And we'll see if anybody's got any opinions in there, because I'm wondering on the legal interpretation there. It's like for that, because you need to be current to be the pilot in command. And of course, that other person's trying to go get night current. Yeah, it's like so the question, and what's the part I don't know the answer to. Can someone who's not a CFI remain acting as PIC while letting the other person handle the airplane? I think the answer is it might be yes, because we can do that with safety pilot when you have someone under the hood, and the safety pilot can be designated as pilot in command. But again, I don't want to give a definitive answer because I'm not 100% sure on that.
Gotcha. Very good. All right, here was a neat equipment upgrade. During the avionics upgrade, we had an external antenna installed that is dedicated to connecting to a handheld radio. It really improves the performance of that radio reception. So a neat safety implementation there. I thought that was good. This was a great question too, Chris, for your explanation of the special VFR at night. You need to be instrument rated and your aircraft needs to be capable for instrument flight, but do you need to be IFR current to fly or request a special VFR at night?
I'll try to look that one up. I'm looking for my flashlight now. Somebody mentioned more about that flashlight you were talking about. I've got it.
Is that the Pelican? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm looking for that. So for the question on that, I will have to look at the reg on the special VFR to double check that one. I'm just looking to see where I've got my special flashlight. I'm pretty sure I've got it in here. Maybe I don't.
Gotcha.
But anyway, so yeah, for the question on IFR, let me look that one up under special VFR. I want to double check that reg and see what it says if you have to be instrument current.
All right, we had a suggestion, or maybe a possible suggestion, for someone that would be landing at a runway at night with no vascular PAPI, sorry. Aim for the third runway light. Have you heard that one?
I have not heard that one, no. Interesting.
Helps give you some angle information, situational awareness.
Yeah, that makes sense though. Yeah. Hold on, let's see here. It's special VFR may be conducted. Oh, here we go. So special VFR may only be conducted with ATC clearance, clear clouds, and except for helicopters between sunset and sunrise and sunset, unless the person being granted ATC meets the applicable requirements for instrument flight under Part 61 and the aircraft is equipped. So yes, you need to be both instrument rated and current, which makes sense. That's what I would have thought, but I just verified that. It's 91-157.
Okay, thank you. Housekeeping items for keeping stuff organized. One idea was have a flashlight like on a necklace, like around your neck. Have that attached so you don't drop or lose. You've always got that one there. That was interesting. A recommendation to reactivate pilot-controlled lighting when on final to make sure that it doesn't turn off right at the most critical phase when you're there, is to reactivate the pilot controlled lighting as a precaution to make sure the lights don't go off.
Yes. In fact, I cannot find my flashlight in here, so I wonder if that little kit dropped out, or I've got to go find that now. But so the flashlight, so it was a little one, had a Velcro attached to my headset, and I'd have to go look out to see if I can find something online. But I do want to talk about that pilot controlled lighting thing.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, I missed that in my notes or getting it on the slide. So the thing there, of course, what you'll want to do, and I know it's in the articles that I've put in the handout. Yeah, you want to be clicking those, probably 10 or 15 miles out, or at least 10, 5. I think it's at 5 to 10 miles out. Click them so you turn them on to help you see the airport, of course. And usually the standard or the norm is that they'll turn off after about 15 minutes. That's just about enough time for you to get on downwind and maybe on the final, and then they'll go off. So usually on downwind, a good idea to click them on again. Usually it's 3 clicks, 5 clicks, 7 clicks, and so on. And the one thing that I learned too, because I learned stuff as I prep for these as well, I went diving a little bit deeper into the chart supplement, which is of course the old airport facility directory. And you can look in there and they will have under, and this is where I had the notes that I can't believe I didn't include it on the slide, but there's a section that I believe that it was under service, and there was the notes in there. So you want to check, because it may not always be that, even though the norm is CTAF, where you'll find that, where you'll be able to click those things on and off, because at a towered field, the tower will control it, and you can always remind them, by the way, if they forget to turn them on. But if you're flying to a non-towered field, usually it's CTAF, but check before you go. And if you look in the AFD, the old AFD, the chart supplement, look in that section in there, and it's under services. You'll see it talks about the pilot control lighting, and the abbreviation, of course, is PCL, and then it'll give you some details about that.
Cool. Here's an interesting one that I hadn't thought about, but use the brake lock or parking brake when stopped reviewing departure plans. So that'd probably be, around the run-up time, because it's very easy not to catch that despite holding the brakes, you might let up inadvertently, and you're not going to have that outside reference to help notice that. So a little extra layer of safety there. Question about carb icing. Is it more of an issue at night than at the day because higher relative humidity and lower air temperatures?
I guess certainly the conditions, if you're getting closer to the dew point, potentially. Yeah, so I suppose it would be. So I don't know if I've never had an experience where it's been more of an issue, but let me think about that. My former chief CFI when I was out in Arizona, Jim Pittman, he had an issue where it was in one of the newer 172s that are not carbureted. It was fuel injected. And I remember him being up at altitude coming out of northern Arizona. And he did have an issue where it's like all of a sudden the RPM started dropping on him, and it wasn't carbureted. And all he could think, and then he descended and it got better. And all he could think of was that he started getting ice on the intake filter, and that the alternate air door had opened, because there's a little spring-loaded door on the airbox on those. So it's possible with the carbureted part, though. It's I guess it might be possible. So just pay attention and be ready to monitor it and pull it on. But obviously it's all about knowing what's the relative humidity and the dew point and so on.
Yeah,
so
and related to that, there was a note real early on when we were talking about flight training about even if it's not forecast, but at your destination airport with a close relative humidity and temperature, likely that there will be fog, ground fog at that location. So if you've got an airport that has those two numbers very close, you can expect to see fog. May not be the best destination for you, even if it's not in one of the forecasts. Notes on iPad use, inverting the colors on the iPad, and you can invert the colors for the approach plates. Thought that was a good advice there. And of course, the feature on the iPad itself is night mode. Will help reduce that glare, the brightness, and help keep your eyes adjusted while you're flying.
And the big thing is play with that ahead of time. I was messing around with it yesterday on my iPad and just playing with it. And you can do that. And then within your EFB, there might be a mode 2 where you can check all the different features out. And one of the things I know you can choose is that you can flip the plates. On an approach plate, like an instrument plate, it's all black with just the white writing, a lot better. But when you go to look at a sectional, for instance, when you invert it, it's really hard to tell what's going on there because it's all black. It's very dark versus the greens that we normally see. So make sure that you are going to be able to handle whatever it is what options you might think you want to choose.
Thinking ahead, being safe, extra prepared If you wear glasses, a second pair of glasses is recommended. So if you've got that, bring those along. You never know when you can need them. Never know if you drop them, can't find them, or you know where that next pair is, neatly organized into your flight bag or otherwise. And if your flashlight is not LED, extra light bulb as well could fit in the pocket there, for sure. Chris, you mentioned not having your taxi landing lights on while you're holding short of the runway, and it was just a note saying, well, you might not be very well seen from the other aircraft. So couldn't that be a problem?
Yes, and that's where you've got to use that judgment. You don't want to be blinding other pilots. That's where also communication would be key. So it's like, especially if the person's on the radio, you could say, hey, I'm holding short down here at the end of the runway, or at the, holding short of whatever runway it is. And so you got to use good judgment. And that's where it's like, maybe, I don't know. And like I said, you got to use common sense. So maybe if they're on downwind and they're the only person that I know is there, so maybe I have my landing light on to let them see me, but as soon as I see them getting ready to final, I turn it off so that I'm not blinding them, right? So those kind of things. So you got to just use your head.
Gotcha. So from a fellow freight pilot, to create a great margin of safety, even when flying VFR, they would use the approach altitudes on the chart to the airport to make sure that they've got that low-level obstacle clearance. That there's no questions there. If it's covered by IFR, then you're going to be covered VFR too. So I thought that was an interesting one. Here is one that could be a bit comical, but it is very real for all of us, especially those of us, Chris, that are getting older in the years, is that you don't buy coffee, you only rent it. So if you're using that to stay awake and stay alert, be aware that you may need to put more frequent stops into your flight plan than you would otherwise. I thought that was a valid point there. Here's one that I love, and it's perfect for the slide that you've got on there right there, Chris, and you're going to get a kick out of this, I'm sure, is that it was a request. Could we please include the time for future sessions in Zulu time, just to eliminate confusion on when that is? So that's it. We're bringing it back.
We have got to be careful because we kept screwing it up.
We've got to do it. I thought you would appreciate that one. We talked about the oxygen, and honestly, that was the key questions that popped up that we didn't cover. I think the other ones were, but let me see. I know people have put some in since we started talking on those that I got to get caught up with.
Yeah, and in fact, I was looking, and now I am on a mission. I've got to find my flashlight kit because it was so cool. And I don't know that I was just looking online. I don't see it on here anymore. I got it forever ago, and it was LED, and it just lasted forever. But it had a little Velcro thing that would stick onto the side, and you could actually add a little ball thing where you could aim it where you wanted it. But I see somebody mentioning the lip light mount types. There are other flashlights out there that do similar things. I just had that one that I loved. It was really cool. So now I'm going to figure out what the heck happened to it. So anyway, but yes, having a flashlight, one of those ones you can attach on, I think it's a great idea. Go ahead, Dan.
Awesome. Well, honestly, I think that got us pretty well through, Chris. I think we're in a good spot.
Okay. Let's see. Yep, I don't see. I jumped all the way to the beginning there. So let's just see if there's any last bits. So if everybody's good, then I guess we were really efficient this time. So I want to thank everybody, obviously, for being here with us. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget, I think this is going to be a fun one. Next month, Pick Our Brains. You're going to get to meet someone from our Pilot Information Center. It is an AOPA member benefit, but I used to work there. I worked there for about a year, my first stint at AOPA, and I learned, I thought I knew stuff, and I realized I knew nothing. These guys know so much about aircraft purchasing and international flying and anything you can think of, and plus most of them are CFIs on top of it. So I think it'll be fun. I'm really curious to see what the questions are that they've got, the most frequently asked questions from this year. So I want to thank everybody for being here. So Stephen, thanks for your help as always. And Dan, glad you were here with me. And I guess we'll call it. We'll see you guys next month. And until then, make sure you fly safe and be well.